Good morning, students. We have started with Roman Empire. We saw how Roman Empire was different from the Persian or the Iranian Empire, its biggest competitor, and we also mentioned and discussed the roles that have been played by and that have been played by some important Roman emperors, and how the shape of the Roman state had been evolving. Right, how it was a republic earlier, where the state powers were differentiated, and they were divided among different institutions of the state, and then how it gradually they got started collecting in everything started got getting collected in hands of one person who was the emperor. And we also discussed certain important emperors of the Roman Empire who had played this role. Okay, so today we talk about we continue with, of course, there. Now, you have to understand, and that we had also talked about, rather, that Roman Empire was a far more diverse empire than the Iranian Empire, where in terms of it had people from different lands, people with different cultures, people who spoke different languages, people with from different race, and naturally with different skills, different temperaments. So the Roman Empire was a far more diverse empire than Iranian Empire ever was. And and the effects that it had, we would look at it today. So much more characteristic was the gradual extension of Roman direct rule. This was accompanied by absorbing a whole series of dependent kingdoms into Roman provincial territory. The Near East was full of such kingdoms, but by the early second century, those which lay west of the Euphrates towards Roman territory had disappeared, swallowed up by Rome. Incidentally, some of these kingdoms were exceedingly wealthy. For example, Herod's kingdom yielded an equivalent of 5.4 million denarii per year. Students, as you see, now when the empire expands, if a kingdom happens to be a very small kingdom, then it is very easy to manage it. If it has a radius of, say, 50 kilometers, or even say 200 or 300 kilometers, it is with a radius of that, and it is much easier to control and manage and administer it properly. But if an empire runs um, 2000 kilometers north south, 2000, 3000 kilometers east west, it is extremely difficult. 500 kilometers north south or 1000 kilometers north south, it becomes very difficult to manage. And especially under the Roman Empire, where there is so much of diversity with people with so different cultures and races, it becomes very difficult to ensure that the administration of those areas under one unified command. And that is what all the rulers through the history, what they have done is that rather than trying to get involved in the micro affairs of these kingdoms, which are kind of away from the main capital area, or the main nucleus of the empire. Okay, like for example, if you talk about Magad Empire, then Magad and the areas around Patliputra, and these areas were the nucleus of the Magad Empire. But if you talk but Magad Empire ruled as far as today's Pakistan. If you talk about it, it ruled as far south as today's Tamil Nadu. So naturally, these areas are much not just away from Patna, that is Magad of today, of yesterday, and Pakistan definitely much more away from Magad, but it will not just in terms of distance, but you have to understand even the races are different. People in South India and Tamil Nadu with Dravid race speaking a different language, having a different culture. The same thing with today's Pakistan, which then used to be Punjab, naturally. So what the rulers, and the same thing was the case with the Romans. So what they used to do was, in the areas around the nucleus, then definitely all the rulers used to hold to those areas and they used to have this stranglehold. But in the areas which were very, very far flung, they used to enter into a very loose kind of an arrangement with the powerful families or the rulers of those areas. And they would, of course, always acknowledge the king in king to be the supreme power. They would never consider themselves as the king, but yes, supreme power would always lie in the hands of the emperor. But then yes, they would rule in his name. Okay, and every year, once in a year or twice in a year, they would pay a huge amount of money to the main emperor, to the emperor rather, and they would just carry on with their own rule, because the emperor would it was a win-win arrangement for both of them, because this guy gets a chance to remain the king, and emperor also gets an opportunity to ensure that he is not micromanaging the affair of that particular place, and he's getting revenue out of that place, and this area is still very much under his final authority. Okay, so that was the modus operandi or mode of operation of the large and the huge empires at at that point in time, and in any culture for that matter, everyone followed the same format. Okay, Near East was full of such kingdoms, but by end, it again swallowed up, and a lot of people were a part of this arrangement even during the Roman Empire. And they have particularly mentioned Herod's kingdom, which was a very, very rich kingdom at that point in time. Now, students, why it's Herod is you should. Though it's not it's not explained in this chapter, but you must understand this name should ring a bell. Herod. Herod was a very famous ruler of those times, very famous ruler of those times, because his he has also been mentioned in the Bible. Okay, he's been mentioned in the Bible, and he's considered to be a great builder. Okay, Herod was a great builder, though he was just a king. He was just a king, but the supreme authority lied with the emperor in Rome. He was just a kind of a dependent king, not exercising the absolute authority like the emperor of Rome. But he was a very influential, very powerful person, and he always enjoyed the confidence of course, it was only in the later part of his, when he became extremely old, that he became a bit unpopular. But then he is a very famous ruler of those times, very wealthy, very famous, and so Herod is there, and I wish we were in class and I could have shown you certain on the board certain other things why Herod is very, very prominently mentioned in a lot of other contemporary texts of those times. Okay, now in fact, except for Italy, which was not considered a province in these centuries, all the territories of the empire were organized into provinces and subjects to taxation. At its peak in the second century, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland. Imagine where Scotland is, right? It's it's part of United Kingdom, to the borders of Armenia. Now, Armenia, guys, is in Asia. Imagine, from Scotland to Asia, and where in Asia, Armenia would be located. South of Turkey. South of Turkey. It is a landlocked country. Students, it doesn't have a sea coast. Okay, it is a landlocked country, and it has other countries like Lebanon and I think Jordan as well. So it is a landlocked country. So we are talking about right from Scotland till here. And we have already seen that the natural geographical boundary of the Roman Empire were those two massive rivers, Danube and Rhine, and in the north, that is, and in the south, that is, in the northern part of Africa. If you cross the Mediterranean, it was the desert of Sahara. So Roman Empire was huge. Now, given that there was no government in the modern sense to help them run things, you may well ask, how was it possible for the emperor to cope with the control and administration of such a vast and diverse set of territories with a population of some 60 million in the middle second century. The answer lies in the urbanization of the empire. The great urban centers that lined the shores of Mediterranean, Carthage is today in Tunisia, that is a country in North Africa, and Alexandria, of course, is in, we all know, it's in Egypt. Alexandria was always very famous for its great library, and Antioch, students, isn't today, is in present day Turkey. Now, Antioch, just a bit of background about Antioch. Antioch is a town which is slightly kind of a new town. Of course, it is again 2,400 years ago. It was established by today's standards. It's much ancient, but then if you talk about the history of those times where everything is 5,000 years old, everything is 6,000 years old, by those standards, it is still kind of new. That is only 2,400 years ago. So Antioch was established by one of the military generals of Alexander the Great. His After Alexander was dead, this town was established by the military general of Alexander. His name was Seleucus Nicator I. Yes, yeah, that's what he was. So yeah, so it was through these cities that the government was able to tax the provincial countrysides, which generated much of the wealth of the empire. So now what we see is Roman Empire was making a huge amount of money, not just from the areas which were considered to be the nucleus areas around, that is the areas around Rome, but also in the far-flung areas of Asia and Africa. So they were surely making a huge amount of money and getting huge taxes from the fertile lands of these places as well. So what this means is that the local upper classes actively collaborated with the Roman state in administering their own territories and raising taxes from them. In fact, one of the most interesting aspects of Roman political history is the dramatic shift in power between Italy and the provinces. Throughout the second and the third centuries, it was the provincial upper classes who supported most of the cadre that governed the provinces and commanded the armies. So, what they are saying is gradually it was these dependent kingdoms and the areas which were not part of the nucleus territory of the Roman Empire, that is the far-flung areas, these areas started becoming much more powerful and much more instrumental apparatus in enhancing the power of the Roman Empire. Okay, and they in terms of trade, in terms of contributing soldiers to the Roman army, everything, and also contributing not just the soldiers, some of its best engineers, best medical practitioners, mathematicians, philosophers. They started coming from all over the empire. And naturally, so now the strength of Roman Empire was not just confined to the area around Rome. And as I said before, that but this is all a double-edged sword. This kind of system, diverse system, which runs into hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, students. This is a double-edged sword, because this works best only if the emperor happens to be a very strong emperor, a very able administrator, very charismatic, very brave, and only then would this kind of system work. It has enormous gains, no doubt about it, but this kind of system cannot be operated by every, just because if you happen to be an emperor, you would not be able to run this machine. This machinery is an extremely complicated machinery, and it needs a great engineer to work on this, though the returns are fabulous, no doubt about it. We shall continue. Thank you.